This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, you all heard that, so you have to be careful what you say because it's being recorded into perpetuity. Um, so uh, I want to begin with something to introduce our I wanted to introduce our Marion's in Vancouver. Cool, welcome. So it's 3 hours, really early for you. So I can extend several hours because it's only 5 p.m. by you. Okay, I want to open with something that is just introduce the topic, not specific to the text I want to study tonight, but let me just do a share here. Okay. You all see this is a book. It's actually only available as an ebook by Kwame Anthony Apayev. One of my pleasures in life is the reading the Sunday New York Times magazine, and there is a weekly section in the Times Magazine called The Ethicist, which deals with various ethical questions. I find it fascinating. And so the author of that section, the person who writes that section each week, it's actually 2 pages. This is Kwame Anthony Apaya, I guess that's how you pronounce it. Very interesting fellow. And he wrote a book, which interestingly is only available as an ebook, but he wrote a book, as you see it before you, The Lies That Bind, it's called, about identity. And so I just want to look at, as an introduction, a tiny selection from his intro. And he talks about his own personal life experiences. Look, he talks about people try to size him. He's hard to size up. He says he's been taken to Portuguese, for a colored person in Cape Town, for an Ethiopian in Rome, and London cabbie thought he was a Hindu. So he is clearly, by his accent and his appearance, people have trouble figuring out his identity. And so he says that the answer to the question of origins, the question of where, if not the what question, he comes from 2 families in 2 places pretty far apart. By the time I was born, my mother had lived in London on and off since her childhood. Her real home was far away. She'd grown up on a farm in a tiny village. Her grandfather had been a genealogist, had a genealogist trace his ancestry through 18 generations to a Norman knight in the 13th century. And when my mother was a Londoner when I was born, she was a countrywoman who happened to work in London. And he has various connections. He also has a Jewish connection he'll talk about. So basically what this whole book does is it talks about the confusions of identity. I may get back to this later if I have time or next time, where he brings in a Jewish element in terms of Jewish identity, which of course is going to be the thrust of what we want to look at tonight. What is identity? And so of course this whole question came up a few weeks ago. I think it's about 3 weeks ago, when on The View, which I've never watched in my life. I have to admit, I've never ever watched The View, and I'm not about to start now, I don't think. But where the moderator, or the host of this View, with 6 panelists, I believe, I think they're all women, is Whoopi Goldberg, who's not Jewish, even though she chose the name Goldberg, evidently and in choosing it, that's not her natural name. Her name is something like Wilson or something. I don't remember what it is. She she liked the fact that it kind of, for some people, identified her as a Jew because she feels very close to the Jewish people. So ironically, of course, she totally angered much of the Jewish world when she made a really dumb comment about the Holocaust a few weeks ago. And that's just the jumping off point. I don't really want to waste time on that because there's a certain sense in America in particular that people who are celebrities, there's value in hearing their opinions on subjects they know nothing about. I learned a long time ago in my career really never to voice opinions on neurosurgery. I really rarely comment on neurosurgery because I don't know anything about it. I may have expertise in other areas, but for some reason people feel that celebrities, have the right to express opinions on something they literally have no clue about. And that's what happened. That's what she got caught in. But again, I'm not interested in what she had to say, or in particular, I'm not interested in that episode per se, but in what it opened up. The whole question of identity: is there such a thing? Is there a Jewish race? What is our identity? It is simply is a religion, is it a nation, and that's really what I want to look at. So I want to just use I want to share with you a few articles, and as okay, so there is a column that appears on a column that appears. Excuse me, something here's really annoying. That in an electronic publication that's called Mosaic. I hope you can all see this on your screens because I can't really see how it's playing out. Okay, good. And one of the regular columnists in Mosaic, I think he appears every 2 weeks. There's a column under the name of Philologus. That's the pen name he uses, but the real person is Hillel Halkin, who's a literist. He's a writer. He's a poet. He's a translator, based in Israel, but he's a remarkable individual. And this column is phenomenal. It deals with, and another one appeared today. He deals with various words and what they mean, various etymologies. And so after the Whoopi Goldberg episode, he wrote this column dealing with race. In other words, again, not trying to go into the Whoopi Goldberg piece, but he felt that, like I felt, that it does open up a very interesting question. Underlying the stupidity of what happened is a very serious question. So I'm just going to read a little bit of this with you because it's going to frame our discussion. He writes, the absurdity of Whoopi Goldberg having to apologize and be suspended from her work for saying that the Holocaust isn't about race either. It's about absurdity, specifically the level to which popular discourse has descended in America in an age of identity politics, Me Too, and cancel culture. He's commenting here, and I kind of agreed with him, that people went too far in suspending her. And I guess people have a right to be stupid. But it wasn't, this great sin. It wasn't a deliberate act, and she did profusely apologize. And at some point in time, we have to accept apologies, and some other people are often reluctant to do so. But he again says that it's an interesting question, and that's where I am right now. Okay. There's often been a lot of foolish talk about race, even though the word itself is of recent and uncertain origin. In the 15th century, raza in Spanish, raza in Italian, race in French, before entering English in the 16th century. 6 different etymologies proposed for it, none provable. Traced to the Latin radix, to Latin radius, a staff, spoke, or radius, that is a line of descent, to Latin ratio, a calculation, value of the breed of an animal, to medieval Latin generatio, reproduction, Old French hara, stud farm, and to Arabic ras, head, like rosh in Hebrew, beginning of something. And so the whole word is interesting, the concept is interesting, and then he goes on to say, Jews have had an involuntary involvement with the R word practically from its inception, and talk about the idea of, at one point, meaning purity of blood, which drew a distinction in the 15th century between Old and New Christians, the latter being Jewish or Muslim converts, whose impurity barred them from serving in certain ecclesiastical, military, and government positions. And the Spanish Inquisition, which, of course, the Inquisition of, by the Catholic Church of Jews in the Middle Ages, also dealt with the issue of purity of race, etc. And, of course, the culmination, the Nuremberg laws of the Nazis of Imak Shemam, the Zichram. So it becomes, the idea of race is relatively new, and there's a certain vagueness to it. At some point, if anyone wants to see the full article, if you email me, I'll be happy to send you a PDF of the whole article. I'm just glancing at it now because of time. And so it turns out that he says the race of Abraham has an equivalent, Geza Avraham, the seed of Abraham. It is a phrase that evokes for Bible readers the nighttime scene in which God tells Abraham to step outside, look around toward heaven, and tell us tell the stars if you're able to renumber them. And he says, so shall your seed be. Your zera, your seed will be as numerous as the stars in the sky. And but the word is also used in other combinations in rabbinic tradition. Zera Yishmael, the seed of Ishmael, the Muslim world, or even Zera Amalek, the seed of Amalek, appropriate to Purim and Shabbat Zachor in the not so distant future from now. So then he talks about the idea of seed, and this again connotes race, the idea of seed, the seed of Abraham, Zera Yisrael, the seed of Israel. The rabbis speak of these two terms as designating people of Jewish ancestry who were not halachically Jewish, since their ancestry ran through the father, not through the mother, or was unclear, but who deserved special consideration if they wanted to become Jewish. So interesting, you could be considered, according to the rabbinic tradition, part of the race of the Jewish people, but not necessarily halachically Jewish. So this makes a complicated topic even more difficult and more hard to understand. And then he goes back to Whoopi Goldberg and saying, I think the response of some Jews to Goldberg's remarks was so exaggerated. It's because the subject of race, which is uncomfortable for everyone, is particularly uncomfortable for the Jews. In an era in which only the supposedly oppressed are allowed to think of themselves in racial terms, it's all right for black Americans to take pride in being black, but taking pride in being white is racist. Jews find themselves alone in no man's land. As long as race was the neutral, loose-fitting word that it was in earlier times, it was normal then to speak of a British race, a French race, or at one point we used the word Negro race. The idea of a Jewish race was not considered to be an embarrassment. But now that terminology is discredited, so we have a problem with a religion that in traditional forms speaks of an ancestral past as one of its defining features. So that's Hillel Halkin, Philologus's comment on the idea of race. In a moment, I want to take you to the Jerusalem Post magazine. This appeared again a couple of weeks ago when this whole story broke, he talks about, again, he's not really wanting to focus on the Whoopi Goldberg issue per se, but on the issue of race and why is this something that's so problematic for us. Part of the issue is, I'm going to go off screen share for a moment. Part of the challenge that we have in this issue of talking about race as Jews, is that we really have trouble defining ourselves. Because we can, and we're going to look at this tonight. Are we a religion? Are we a nation? Or do we have common origins at some point in history? Do we have common ancestors and we trace our descent from those ancestors? What actually are we? When we want to say that we are a religion only, that creates a certain complication. And I will, though, what's the complication that it says that we are a religion? Let me ask the question, maybe one of you wants to answer. What is the complication if we were to say that Judaism is not, there's such thing as a Jewish race, we are, being Jewish means Judaism, we're adherents of the Jewish religion of Judaism. That's what being a Jew is all about. That's what Jewishness is, religion, it's not race. What's the problem with that approach? Or is there a problem with that approach? Or is that the right approach? And again, there's no uniform consensus anywhere at any point in time in the Jewish world as to the answer to this question. But what's just off the top of your heads, as it were, if you were so to say, is Jewishness a religion? Is it what is it? How would you answer the question before we look at other authorities and columns? Okay, let me. Okay, Mark, I see you. Mark Brennick?
Yeah, I think it's an issue because there are a lot of Jewish people that don't practice any religious rituals and still consider themselves Jewish. So there's no religious aspect to their identity as being Jews.
So what you're saying that if we were, that would not be a sufficient definition to say that Jewishness is religion, because that would put a lot of people out of the picture.
Correct.
Like, what do you take? Basically, one of the most popular Jewish denominations in the latest Pew survey in the U.S. of the American Jewish community, one of the largest groupings was Reform is very large, Conservative is weaker, Orthodox is actually a bit less than Conservative. People don't realize that. But one of the largest groupings, I think it's like 40%, is Jews of no religion. In other words, people who claim to be Jewish but who do not claim to be practitioners of the Jewish religion. We're going to get back to that. I want to see if there are other people who want to comment, and then I want to look inside a couple of texts on that issue. Anyone else? I'll look at, there are 2 pages, so I have to go to the second page too. I can't, if you're blanked, unless you do the electronic hand. Anyone else? Do I see anyone else waving a hand? Okay, so let's look at a text. Well, let me just check the chat, because Lorraine wanted to say something. Is that true, Lorraine?
Again, that people identify a lot with the culture and different aspects of it, which don't directly relate necessarily to the religion. So the same idea is.
So if you're going to say, if you're relating more to the culture, actually we're going to look at some text inside, and we'll get the answer. I first want to deal with the issue of, I want to show you a point of view that very strongly suggests that well, I see now that, first of all, I'm going to interrupt. I see that Dave and Ruth Solomon have joined us. I want to see if you're on yet. Yeah, because I want to thank you so much for sponsoring tonight's session, and we're very grateful for your generosity, and I personally thank you for sponsoring in my honor. That doesn't happen every day, and I don't take that for granted. So, toda rabah. I want to share something with you on that very question, and one of the more interesting people. 1 second. I'm sorry, this sort of scanned a bit crooked. Yaakov Labovitz, he passed away about 15 years ago, was a phenomenally interesting figure in Israel. His sister Nechama Labovitz was one of the exemplary biblical commentators. Her commentaries are still studied. They were brother and sister. They did not really get along, but both were very, very famous in their own way. Yaakov Labovitz, Orthodox Jew, frum guy. He was a biologist or a biochemist, a scientist. But he was known not for his science, but he was known for his very provocative views on Judaism, on halakha, on He was considered to be a Jewish scholar and wrote a lot about Judaism. But he had a very, very particular point of view. And he would, in a sense, disagree with the position that many will hold. When, that Mark expounded, and I probably would share, that there is a problem to identify Jewishness totally with Judaism. But he does. Because Labovitz basically says that the only uniqueness of Judaism basically is, here, I'm going to jump to the second paragraph. The whole article is worth reading, but we don't have time. The Jewish people, as it has existed in history, is definable only by reference to its Judaism. A Judaism that was not a mere idea in the mind, but a realization of a program of living set forth in the Torah, delineated by its mitzvot. This way of life constituted the specific national content of Jewishness. In other words, the uniqueness of the Jewish people. The Jew practiced a way of living that was exclusively his. His style of eating was not that of the Gentile. The Jewish kitchen differed from that of all other people. The sexual practices of Jews were peculiar to them, since they were governed by the laws and rituals pertaining to the menstrual cycle and the purity of the family. In the practical domain of work and industry, the observance of the Sabbath set them apart. Unlike the identities of the people that are characterized by race, language, territory, or state, the national identity of the historic Jewish people is Judaism. the actuality of which is life according to the Torah. And so what Yeshayahu Labovitz is saying very provocatively is that there ain't no Jewishness without Judaism, that it is the totality of the religion. And he has some really interesting articles, like he basically will say that he's not heavily into ethics. Not to say he was unethical, God forbid, but he felt ethics wasn't Judaism. It wasn't Judaism. Like he would be if you wanted to pick two polar opposites in Jewish history or in Jewish theology, it would be Yeshayahu Labovitz on one side and Reform Judaism on the other side. Reform Judaism, the early reformers rebelled against the ritual aspect of Judaism, and they basically termed their Jewish understanding as prophetic Judaism, from the word prophet, Prophet, not prophet, Fit, but from like the Nevi'im, from the prophets of the Bible, that basically who preached a morality. He felt Reform believed that Judaism, and they kind of have moved away from that somewhat in the last century, but certainly in the foundational years of Reform, they believed that Judaism, in their view, was ethics. That's all that mattered, was ethics. The other stuff didn't matter anymore. Leibovitz comes in on the opposite side of the spectrum, saying that is not Judaism. It's nice. Ethics is ethics, but it's universal. You can, it doesn't make you any more Jewish than it makes you more Christian or more whatever. It's not Judaism. Judaism is mitzvot. It's ritual. It's the halacha. It's the practices that define us as a people. That's his definition. It's not a race. It's not a nationality. It's not based on where you live. It's not culture. It's halacha. It's mitzvah. That is the totality of Judaism, according to Leibovitz. And that's a very strong point of view. It was also, in a sense, the point of view of Moses Mendelssohn, which is another, a German Jewish philosopher of the 18th century, who was an Enlightenment figure, again, a very ethical person, but he viewed Judaism in a very Leibovitchian way, although Leibovitz came later, so I shouldn't say it in those terms. But it was, again, basically understanding Judaism based on halacha, based on Torah, on mitzvah. That's what defined us, because that's what made us distinct in the world. So the idea of identity for Mendelssohn, for Leibovitz, and for Mendel, and for others, was really based on, you take Judaism away, like Leibovitz would say, if you can't be Jewish by, but not Jewish by religion, then you're not Jewish. You're no longer Jewish according to his point of view. And if you look at, by the way, the standard Orthodox approach to conversion today is based exclusively on severe adherence to mitzvah. And I don't say they're wrong, but that's the view. Like, you have to be very punctilious in terms of your observance of mitzvah. That's what matters. You have to have a good knowledge of halacha, and that's what can make you a Jew. Nothing else really is relevant other than that. They're not going to have, when we have a conversion program in the conservative movement, we have courses in Bible, in history, in theology. They don't do that, because that's not, it's not pertaining specifically to mitzvah. It's, it takes a wider perspective. That perspective of identity is very, very narrow, very, very concise, and very, very clear. So from that perspective, Jewish identity is based solely on religion and religious identity. None of the other stuff defines you as a Jew. It may be nice. I remember when, I don't sponsor too many converts these days. This, for obvious reasons, I'm not, in the day-to-day rabbit anymore. I'm doing things here and there, but when I used to sponsor converts, so one of the first questions, a convert usually would come in as a couple, because usually there was a future marriage as part of the equation. As we're realistic, we know that that's where people are coming from in most cases. And that I was more comfortable with that than somebody coming to say, well, Rabbi, I want to be Jewish because I had a vision. God spoke to me during the night and said, you have to be Jewish. And then I would get nervous and start davening very quickly and start saying Tehillim and really panicking. I was much happier when someone said, I'm remarried. I met this hot girl. I really want to marry her, and I love her, and I really want to marry her. So in order to marry her, I have to become Jewish. So I like the honesty, but we require more than just that. There has to be commitment, etc. But I used to love it when I would say, well, tell me what your Jewish contact to this point. And if you want to enter a serious program to explore entering Judaism, and to learn and to study and to prepare to make that commitment, what's been your exposure to Judaism thus far in your life? What do you know about Jewishness? And more than once I would get the answer, I really love lox and bagels. And so then I would say, I couldn't always say that because it didn't happen in my early years in the rabbinate, but for the last 15 or 20 years in the rabbinate, I could say, well, Tim Hortons they don't have lox, but they have bagels. And I don't think eating at Tim Hortons really is a good definition of introduction to Judaism. Especially certain things on the menu would be a really very poor introduction to Judaism. But that would be for a lot of people, by the way, that's and a lot of people who are Jewish, that's the main identity. It's the Sunday morning brunch. That's the main identification factor. That really becomes. So Yaakov Labovitz and much of the Orthodox world, to a certain extent me, but a lot of people are going to say, that's not Judaism. It's lovely, but it's not Judaism. It's not Judaism. That's not going to be sufficient of identification. Now, we also, by the way, we're challenged, of course, by saying racial, and when we speak of racism in general society, Beth David is dealing a lot with anti-racism, which is a good thing and important. But when we talk about that, we're generally, referencing visible minorities, people who, by sight, because of skin color or other very, obvious.
Sorry, could you say that again? I'm having trouble hearing you.
That was really interesting. Did you hear that? That Siri went on. I think that's my phone. Did any of you hear that?
I did, yes.
Are you guys hearing me? Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay, I don't. That mystery voice is not hearing me. Wait a second. That was really weird. I think my house is haunted. So there are. I of course lost my train of thought with that. What was I talking about? I literally lost my train of thought. It totally took me off that. Anyone remember what I was talking about?
Yeah, visible minorities.
Thank you, and that's why at least one of the 40 people on tonight is going to remember. I would appreciate that many visible. So, but then the racial identification then becomes easier. But is that the only way in which an identification can be that can be achieved? Is it only through skin color? Is it only through? It could be through accent. Is there a way of identifying where you're not necessarily subscribing to a universal physical racial appearance? We have Jews of all extraction. We're talking about racial sensitivity within synagogue life. We talk people who have come from different parts of the world. We have people who are Jews of color. We have people with different skin tones. We're not all uniform. We're not all Norwegian white. We have all kinds of different appearances. So it's hard to define us, but so it's more complicated. Doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't a kind of racial commonality between Jews, but we find that it's a harder thing to judge. That's not necessarily the main point of unity in terms of Judaism. So we don't necessarily consider ourselves primarily to be a race. Certainly the Nazis did. That's where Whoopi Goldberg got into trouble, because it was idiotic to say that Nazis were we're part of the same group, when they very clearly, with their racial laws, made it explicit that they view us as part of an inferior race. So others viewed us that way because it was easy to compartmentalize us as part of a Jewish race. The great artist Saul Steinberg, who was an architect. The famous story was he was originally Italian, and he talked about how when he was recognized, when he graduated architectural school in Italy, his diploma listed all of these various titles, all these various aspects of his life, about his architectural degree, etc. And it also said he was of the Reza Hebraica. He was part of the Jewish race. And he said at the end of his life, he was no longer an architect. He didn't do this other stuff, but that was the one thing that stayed with him. He was always a Jew. So there were times that we did use the terminology. It's not as easy to define, but we have these other definition points. Again, the point of identifying as part of a religion, but we see that to be problematic because it does exclude. I mean, you have the people like Labovitz who are going to say it's only mitzvot, but then we're going to find a lot of our people are going to be excluded. I would say there'd be one or two members of Beth David that would no longer be considered Jewish. If we're identifying only by your level of religious practice, that's going to exclude people. Although, mind you, belonging to a synagogue would probably be a major inclusion factor, but the 50% plus who or more now who don't belong to synagogues at all, who are not observant, you're not going to be able to. We're going to be saying then that they're not Jewish, and we don't necessarily want to say that. So I want to look at something. By the way, anytime if you want to wave and scream and want to interrupt with a question, please feel free to do so. I'm not good at looking at a chat during Zoom. I will try periodically to do that because sometimes you ask questions in the chat. Yeah, well, here I see Linda making a good comment that the backlash is more about the recognition of the negation of racism rather than the race issue. Offensive to think that if you're Jewish and white, racism and anti-Semitism will not be taken seriously. So, there have to be, we have to have, in a sense, probably what that is saying is a broader understanding of what race can be. It's not only going to be limited to what's visible, but there'll be other aspects of commonality that will be present as well. But what I'm probably going to leave you with tonight is going to be not only a state of total and utter confusion, but a state to say this is this is a very confusing topic. As it turned out, very interestingly, yesterday, one of the many million things I subscribe to is Jewish Learning, my Jewish Learning. And some of this, they have some interesting stuff in there. It's not at necessarily the highest level, but it's not bad. And they talk here about, are the Jewish people chosen? And then we go on to say, very same question that we raised earlier, are Jews only chosen if they keep the covenant? The tradition assumes that chosenness is not an essential characteristic of the Jewish people, but rather a result of covenantal relationship. Exodus captures the view, now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you will be my treasured possession amongst all people. God's going to choose us only if we accept our part in the covenant, if we accept our agreement. Later thinkers embrace this conditional understanding of chosenness, but there is another strand of thought which maintains that chosenness derives from an inherent quality. The most famous proponent of this view was Judah Halevi. According to him, the Jews are endowed with divine influence. This trait is passed on genetically. So he is saying there is a physical component to Jewishness. It's not simply our obeying the mitzvot, but it's part of our DNA. According to him, the Jews are endowed with divine influence. This trait is passed on genetically. It includes a capacity for prophecy and the privilege of receiving special divine providence. All the other nations of the world are subject to a more general providence, the whims of the natural world. And so my Jewish learning asks the question, is it racist to believe the Jews are chosen? Interestingly, though, some have seen this position as racist. It was embraced in different forms, even though some have seen it as racist. It was embraced by the Reform leader Abraham Geiger, one of the founders of Reform Judaism, who believed that Jewish chosenness is reflected in a native talent for religion. Many modern Jews have been uncomfortable with the idea of being chosen, particularly the genetic variety. So you have two major thinkers here, one from the early Middle Ages, Yehuda Halevi, the great poet and philosopher, and one of the earliest Zionists, My Heart is in the East, this very, very famous Libi Mizrach, his very famous poem, one of the great Zionist poems of Jewish history, founder of the Reform movement, and Geiger, nothing to do with the counter, who basically also believes that there's something in our DNA, there's something that's part of us that's genetically inherited, which has he describes as a native talent for religion, and makes us basically amenable to accepting commitment and mitzvot. But then you have the person who stood against this was Mordechai Kaplan, longtime professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary, my alma mater, but who founded Reconstructionist Judaism. The name now has now been changed to Reconstructing Judaism. Very few people know that, but it has a new name now. He did not believe in a supernatural God, rejected chosenness. In many respects, Reconstructionism, which was a breakaway from conservative Judaism, became more radical than Reform. In its rejection of chosenness, it changed the blessings, the brachot that we make over the Torah, because Kaplan refused to say Asher Bachar Bani, Asher Bachar Banu, recognizing God who chose us, Mikol Ha'amim, from all other nations. The Reform, by the way, did not change the bracha, but the Reconstructionists, or the reconstructing Jews, did change the bracha, because he believed that it was morally problematic because of the fundamental superiority of one people. So that's our view of my Jewish learning. So we see the idea of chosenness relevant to the idea. What does that mean? Does that mean, in a sense, there is a racial component because there's something about us in terms of our makeup? It's not simply we make a choice to accept. As Yaakov Labovitz, he's not worrying about our DNA, even though he was a scientist. He's, it's basically we commit to mitzvot, then we can claim to be Jewish. Yeah, it helps to be born Jewish. If part of mitzvot is being halachically Jewish, but if you're not born Jewish, you have the possibility in most parts of the Jewish world to convert to Judaism, assuming that you accept the commitment of halacha. The extent to which you have to accept it, of course, will vary. More minimalist in Reform, moderate in the conservative movement, and extremist in Orthodoxy. Some parts of the Orthodox world never allow conversion. In much of the Sephardic world, conversion is never permitted because it's felt to be impossible. Perhaps they're going back to a Yehuda Halevi position, which is suggesting that it's part of our DNA. In other words, you can't join the club because you're not part of. I can't become an African American. I can't. There are a couple of cases, famous stories of people who masqueraded as African Americans, of American blacks, and there's some famous examples of that in the last, in recent times. But you can't really do that. I mean, I can't decide. I want to be, and I really love the culture. I love I just love the music. I really, they're great people. I just love them. I love the vibe. I love all of that. And I can't do it. You can't. It's not you. You're not. You don't have the chromosomes. You don't have the genes. You don't have the genetic makeup in order to make that possible. So we have components in Judaism. Abraham Geiger in modern times, in the early Middle Ages, the 11th century, Yehuda Levi saying, you can't. You have to have it within you. So Halevi is going to have a problem with converts. Geiger, I don't know about who we felt about conversion, but it's problematic if you say that part of the nature of being a Jew is having this inherited physical characteristic or internal characteristic trait that makes it possible for you to be a Jew. It's more than simply accepting a way of life. It's more than just the religion. It's certainly more than the culture, which, by the way, is probably the least relevant defining tool because Jewish culture is different in every aspect of the world. Jewish culture in Israel is different from Jewish culture in Brooklyn, or Jewish culture in Toronto is different to a certain extent from Jewish culture in Montreal. There are similarities, but there are distinct differences between Jewish culture in different parts of the Jewish world today. And certainly if you go to Jews of North Africa, Moroccan, the culture, there's no, Moroccan Jews don't eat bagels. I mean, maybe they do, but they don't, it's not part of what they didn't grow up with it. And not every Ashkenazi Jew, has, has couscous every morning. We're adjusting to it. We're becoming cross-cultural in terms of acquiring new tastes and a lot of that's happened in Israel with all of the bringing together of Jewish populations from different parts of the world. But I don't think Ben Gurion had falafel a lot, and I'm not sure that the Abulafia family, one of the leading Sephardic families in Israel, were into were into kishka or into other native Ashkenazi foods. I would say they're not into cholent, but that's not true. There is a Sephardic cholent they call chamin in Israel. It's very different. And almost everything in the world gets into Sephardic cholent, which is called chamin. I mean, but they put everything. They put the whole kitchen sink in their chamin. You find sometimes they put eggs with the shell and all kinds of stuff, and this is really kind of interesting. Very different from Ashkenazi. But the defined by culture is challenging. Defining by religion is limiting. But there are, we're still not clear. So let's look at something else for a second. I'm trying to see as I take pauses, I'm just looking to see if there's anybody waving a hand with a question. Okay. I see Sarah with a question. Please.
Well, this is about culture, and I was
Yeah.
thinking, as you were speaking of, a dear colleague of mine, Mr. Sinclair, was very fond of quoting the American anthropologist Nikki Goldschmidt, who defined culture as how we are raised, which is far broader than food or music,
Right.
or culinary aspects of life.
Right.
But there are aspects of how we are raised, family, tradition, ritual, that don't have to be shul-based, but we could find all over the world amongst Jewish families. I just wanted to put that on the table.
No, I think it's right. I mean, I'm a big fan of Yiddish culture, and which is fascinating. I spent some time in university. I studied Yiddish. I support the Yiddish Book Center in Amherst, Massachusetts. It's an amazing organization that has basically been very involved in the revival of Yiddish and training young people to speak Yiddish, and collected millions of Yiddish books that were being discarded by grandchildren who were basically inheriting their grandparents' libraries that nobody could read anymore. They've now digitalized more than 1 million volumes of Yiddish literature and translating a lot of Yiddish into English that never existed for the world that is not exposed to some of the greatness of Yiddish literature. So I'm really a big fan of Yiddish literature. One of the ironies of that, in terms of the conflict between culture and religion, is that those who embrace Yiddish literature, as do I, and many others, are basically not the ones who are preserving the language. Who's preserving Yiddish language? The Hasidic world, the Haredi world, the ultra-Orthodox world, who do not accept the culture. They will not read the literature. They will not have the literature in their homes because it's not religious. So the culture, the language of the Yiddish culture is being preserved by those who reject the culture, but use the language because they don't want to use Hebrew because that's Lashon Kodesh. That's the holy tongue that you don't use for everyday talk. So they speak in Yiddish. They use Yiddish. That's where Yiddish as a language is spoken. It's spoken in Williamsburg and Borough Park, and you have young Yiddish children, young Haredi children. They're speaking Yiddish to each other, perfect Yiddish. They're never going to even have heard the name Shalom Aleichem or Yud Lamed Per. It's non-existent to them because they reject the culture. So that's the real irony here, that the language is being preserved by those who reject the culture, and the language is being lost by those who want the culture. That's why the Yiddish Book Center is so important, because they're trying to train future generations in the language so that there'll still be those who are able to read Yiddish, even amongst in the non-Hasidic and Haredi worlds, where they're going to embrace the culture, which is such a rich culture. I mean, it is an unbelievable culture, and that's probably not been equal to many places. The richness of Yiddish literature. And now some of it's available in really good translations now, and some of it's being retranslated, but some incredibly it's not equal. I mean, modern Hebrew literature, some of it's really good, but it's a relatively new enterprise. It's only in the last say the last century, but really the last 50 years that it's really come alive. But it hasn't reached the level of Yiddish literature. Like Yiddish literature of the Shalom Aleichem, the Peretz, it's at a level almost unequaled, and like people like Isaac Bashevis Singer and others who just wrote it at such an amazing level, and it's such a beautiful resource. I've told the story in sermons, in my earlier life, about when I was studying Yiddish at McGill, and we reached the level of being able to actually read Yiddish literature in Yiddish. And when I'd read in English translation as a kid, the famous parrot story, Bunch of Schweig, Bunch of Be Silent, or Bunch of the Silent. It's a great story. It's a fabulous story, often misunderstood, but it's a very powerful story, probably a beautiful story. Probably one of the greatest stories of any literature. But reading English translation at the end of the story, I can't go into the detail, but this poor Buncha who suffers his whole life is being rewarded, and the judge of the heavenly court says, you've suffered your whole life, you've been mistreated, and then now in the world, in the future world, you get whatever you want. What do you want? And he just he doesn't, and so he says in the English translation, really, really, really. But when I was able to read that in Yiddish, when I was studying Yiddish, and I'm reading Taka, okay, I was crying. It was just so moving to actually read because you feel it. It just has a different feel, and that so we need so that's part of the challenge where you have this conflict between culture and religion, that you have Jews who identify by religion only. More than that, like the Haredim also, there's certain external aspects to their identification, which is dress. That sometimes going back a few centuries, sometimes not going back that long, but dress kind of identifying with a certain community through dress, through the physical appearance. Whether it's a beard, this is my COVID beard, but there's but ultimately there's still the primary identification in the religious world is through mitzvah, through identification with the religion, and the religion as to how your parents practiced, how your grandparents practiced it, how it was handed down to you, and it will reflect the community customs where you grew up. But it's ultimately in the context of religion, and the dress code is based on religion as well, whether it's tzniut, modesty, or what have you, respect for elders. But it's and the religious principle in those communities of basically Chadash Asur Min HaTorah, that novelty is forbidden, that you don't change anything, including the way your great-grandfather dressed. That's how you're going to dress, no matter if it's no longer the custom where you live, no matter if it's the middle of summer and you're wearing a heavy coat. That's how that's how you're going to dress. No discussion. But that's primarily, again, based on religion and religious identification, not simply based on cultural affinity, but based on that very, very restrictive environment in which you were raised. And that's where Labovitz was coming from, etc., defining by religion. And there are those who define by culture, and sometimes very seriously. You have, we now know people like the whole idea of a Jewish secularist. Hillel Halkin would say, there's no such, you can't be a Jewish secularist. You're a secularist, you're no longer Jewish. And that's, of course, how much of the right-wing world will view people who are saying they're secular. You're not Jewish anymore. They'll view us as being not Jewish. That's another story. But if you're, so how do you, how do we find, I think what we're coming to tonight in our discussion is a multiplicity, a view that suggests that we're a bit of a lot of things. It's not a very clear-cut, very clean definition. To say we're part of a race, there are those who've said that we have something, there's something Jewish within us. There's a Yiddish spark, there's something within us. I've had people, by the way, I talked about conversion before. I've had parents whose kids that are coming into their family through marriage, where I've had, parents who were really saying out front that, they weren't really going to accept the conversion. Because they're not really going to be Jewish. They're not really going to be Jewish because it's not in their kishkas. They'll pass the course. Even if they do the ritual, they'll light Shabbos candles, they'll say Kiddush, maybe they'll go to shul, they'll learn a few words of Hebrew, they'll walk the walk. Of course, halacha means the walk, so that's significant. But it's not in them. That's where Yehuda Halevi would say, you didn't inherit the gene, so it's never going to be complete, and there are those who feel that way. And, but I will say that my answer to that usually is, there are those who inherit the gene, but it's so dormant that it's irrelevant. There's this great phrase in Yiddish, das Pintele Yid, the spark of the Jew. And that implies also that there's this hidden spark in every Jew, which almost is like Yehuda Halevi, and it is, you inherit this spark. It's often dormant. And at some point, it can be ignited. That something happens that captures the imagination. And I've witnessed that in my rabbinate in the years. I've witnessed it in life. Often, not often, but well, maybe often, it happens at a time of a great emotional events in life. Time of death is one of the most obvious. People experience a loss. Somebody who's never been near a shul in his or her entire life starts to go to shul during the period of Shiva and then never stops going to shul. If people in our congregation have been in that situation. But sometimes that's the igniting factor that ignites Das Pinteliyid, that takes that inherited spark and ignites it. So maybe there is such a spark, but it's often dormant. The question becomes, can one become Jewish without inheriting that spark? I would argue the answer would be yes. It may, there are ways of compensating for the lack of that spark, just like we can compensate if we lack certain enzymes. Medicine and science enable us to survive, to cope, and even live very productive lives, whether it's through medication. I'm not saying you need to be medicated if you're not born Jewish in order to be Jewish. So don't quote me on that one. But there are certain aspects, certain ways that, there are ways that we can compensate that may not be ideal. It's, someone who converts will always, I wish I were born Jewish, but it didn't happen. You can't change that reality. But maybe you can, if you can become 99.9%, very few of us are, nobody's 100% any. And the way I've described it sometimes is, how do you know that somebody has crossed that bridge of not having that Das Pinteliyid, not having it within them from birth, not inheriting the Jewishness, but how do we know that they've really succeeded in becoming part of the Jewish family? There are a lot of examples. We worry today about the Jewish communities in Kiev and in Ukraine. And I have friends who are rabbis in Ukraine. And I've been in touch with them. And they're scared. We worry about any Jewish community. We cry when there's a tragedy in Israel. It's not simply we read the news and say, oh, that's too bad. But inside it affects us. If you have that feeling, that kvel, that sense of shame when a Jew does something terrible, when you have a Jew who makes the news for the wrong reasons, and you feel a sense of embarrassment, that's a negative aspect of it, but that's part of that spark, Das Pinteliyid, that we feel discomforted, and we feel great pride when a Jew does something great. We feel it's different, and I'll make a confession. I read the Labovitz section. I read the. This is terrible. I really shouldn't admit this publicly, but I told you I read the Sunday New York Times. It's one of my pleasures, my guilty pleasures in life. I don't always love the New York Times, but there's just a lot in that paper. And so I read the Sunday social section. So you read they've changed the whole layout of the wedding section now, and it's very controversial. They no longer do it the way they used to. But they used to do it like they have a lot of marriages, and it was just like society marriages. And of course I gravitate to the Jewish couples. I do it in the obituaries too. One of our late members, who I love, but he was a character, but one of our members who died several years ago, but he used to say that he doesn't read the Globe. Why? Jews don't die in the Globe. So, we don't like to admit it, but we tend to gravitate. I admit it. That's where, I look at others, but I'm sort of glad, if I see a Jewish name, that's where I'm looking first. When there's the Lives column, and occasionally with great pride, I see some of our members written up. I remember the beautiful piece of Merv Stone. Lynn is here tonight. And others in our congregation who were remembered in the Lives, that's in the Globe and Mail. So sometimes it's worth reading. And then I have a special feeling of identification. I see someone's Jewish, then I make sure I read it. If someone, I'm not as quick to read it. I'm being honest, but it's part of the spark when you're prioritizing your own, and that becomes a sense of, and I think that can be acquired. I'm not saying it's a wrong thing to read Gentile obituaries. God forbid. You should be able to, want to recognize the world. We feel bad for anyone who dies. When it's a tragic, we're not caring what the religion is at that point. we're also looking at other. But there's a certain sense that there's a feel inside that it hits us more. That's part of it's family, and it's not just it's not just the world, which is we feel bad, but when it's family, you feel a different level of pain. That's part of what we inherit. And I think there is something that's inherent. That may be a racial aspect of being a Jew. But to a certain extent, I think it can be acquired. We have people in our own community who are Jewish through choice, who converted some many years ago, who are passionately Jewish. And it would be really hard to distinguish between them and people who are born Jewish. And in many cases, again, it's a dormant quality in people who are born Jewish. They don't think about it at all. It means nothing, or very little. And maybe it's das Pintelia that someday will be awakened, but the truth is, in most cases, it won't be awakened. Or in many cases, it won't be. It'll just always be there. You'll live with it, you'll die with it, and it will never be noticed. The person now whose reputation has suffered greatly, and I used to find very funny, still find funny, but he has a very, his reputation has been damaged, I'm not going to go into whether it's right or wrong, but I kind of lost, my taste for Woody Allen when he was recorded as saying, and I'm not dealing at all with the sexual issue that I'm not going to opine on that because I have no idea of what's going on, and I almost don't, it's not something of concern to me. But somebody, it was reported that it was like Rosh Hashanah time, Jew Simon said, Shana Tova. He said, I don't do that. In other words, he rejected someone wishing him a happy Rosh Hashanah Tova. Not only was he not observant, but he rejected being singled out for anything to do with Judaism. That, to me, I would say is a bridge too far. Mm-hmm. You can be non-observant, but at least, when you're denying any connection to your people, except to make fun of it, except to ridicule,
yeah,
and to use it as a source of humor, like his Jewishness is so central to his humor. He's the Nebush, when he was in films when he was younger, and that was his whole character, his whole persona was based on being basically a Jewish loser who always chased after the unattainable Gentile woman. I'm thinking a term that I'm not going to use publicly, but that would be the way it would be described. He always fantasized, and that's usually who he'd end up with. But it was always basically kind of a rejection of his own identity. So I do want to take another. Was there any before I go further? Was there any other comment or question? Okay, I want to look at something else here quickly. Second. Yeah. Okay, just to give you a sense of many of the terms that are used to describe our identification as Jews. We have, this is from a introduction to a book that's edited by Menachem Loberbaum and Noam Zohar. It's called The Jewish Political Tradition. And this actually is the introduction to the book, talking about the language they're going to use, but it's a great introduction to the various terms that deal with Jewish identity. So one of the terms they'll talk about is Yisrael, Israel, because Jacob becomes Israel. And so there's the Bnei Yisrael as one of the identifications. The first identification in Exodus, what we've been reading in our current Torah cycle, Bnei Yisrael, the first identification, the descent of the children, the people of Israel. That's the first. Then there's the idea of Pharaoh introduces the term people. That Pharaoh declares to his people, behold, the of Israel, b'nei, so the people, we often translate it as ancient nation, they're more mightier than we. They've turned from a small nation, a small kin group, into a mighty people. And so you have the idea of Yisrael, a nation, and then you have the term Ivrim, Hebrews, and probably coming from the word Aver, meaning across, or Aver, across the river Euphrates, pointing to the Mesopotamian roots of the people. And very famously, Jonah refers to him, he says, Ivri Anochi, I am a Hebrew. And And the writer says that secular Jewish nationalists at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th centuries, they liked the term Hebrew because they rejected the term Israel and Jewish or Jews, because that was, in a sense, too religious for them. The word Hebrew was more neutral. So you had interestingly, the Reform Rabbinical Seminary is Hebrew Union College, and when the JTS, Jewish Theological Seminary, opened, it was the Reform counterpart, the conservative counterpart to the Reform Seminary. They very, obviously chose the term Jewish Theological Seminary because they wanted to make a statement that we're not afraid to identify as Jewish. We're not looking to hide that identity. Hebrew was kind of considered to be more socially acceptable. I've always remarked, and I think it still exists, and I'm not sure because a lot of Jewish publications have ceased to exist, but I believe it still does. The Jewish newspaper in Cincinnati, which was the home city of the main campus of Hebrew Union College, was known as the American Israelite, which was also, again, just not to use the term Jewish because it takes you a step away from the religiosity which people who are secular really wanted to take a step away from. So a lot of times the way we identified with various terms was through the choice of word that we would say, I'm Hebrew, which was kind of considered to be a little more neutral than saying I am Jewish, which kind of interesting. So the identification points, whether it be racial, whether it be religious, whether it be cultural. We talk about Jewish identity, but again, Jewish identity is as we see, it's very complicated. So it's really very simple. We can't reject. All of you have correctly said that we can't reject the idea that there is a legitimate identification with Jewish culture. I confess to identifying with Jewish culture, specifically with Yiddish culture. What does Yiddish mean? A Yid is a Jew, so it's Jewish culture. I identify with Jewish culture. I certainly identify, hopefully, with Judaism. I'd be in trouble if I don't. And I do believe that there is such a. I do believe in the idea of Pintel Yid, that there's something inherently Jewish about us, but again, which is not something that is by definition irretrievable if one chooses to become Jewish. And again, only various limited segments of the Jewish community reject the possibility of conversion. And again, you find those elements in the Sephardic community where nobody's allowed to convert because it's not possible to become part of the club. It is totally an exclusive club. But even most who are on the extreme, religious streams of Judaism will accept the possibility of conversion, again with very strict parameters, very strict requirements, but will accept the possibility, assuming that you accept the full 9 yards of Jewish observance. When we talk about it, we will be less severe in terms of the level of mitzvah. We expect mitzvah commitment, but it's to a lesser extent. But we will widen the definition to expect a certain identification with the cultural reality of the Jewish world. And I add to, part of my requirement has always been that, a requirement. I will not convert somebody who will say I'm anti-Zionist. I just won't do it. I mean, even though there'll be those in the religious world that won't care about that aspect, I will care about that deeply because I feel that part of identification is again, having the Jewish heart. I don't think a Jewish heart you can't be an anti-Zionist and a Jew with compassion for his or her people at the same time. To me, that's mutually excluding one to the other and not possible. And I'm not unique in that position, but I think so. There are all kinds. So it's the whole. I don't think Whoopi Goldberg had any idea. She had no idea. That's clear. No idea what she was talking about, but she had no idea the extent to which she opened up a very, very complicated discussion as to how do we identify. We don't necessarily identify as any one of these exclusively, unless you're a Yeshua Halevitz. It says we identify as Jewish through halacha and through mitzvot in toto, and that's it. But even in our discussion and where we are and looking at other thinkers, we see that the identification is more complicated than that. There is a sense of having some kind of thing that we inherit, There's a sense of being sensitive to our cultural environment and to our upbringing, to what we've inherited. And there's a sense of having a national identity as well. There is a new book that has come out. I'm always happy to acquire new books, which I just started to read, so I'm not really going to talk much about it, called The Israeli Century, which speaks about Zionism and Israel in the 20th century becoming the chief identification point for Jews today. And examples about that is what that's more determinative than anything else in modern times. And when I read the book, I'll tell you whether I agree or not. I'm kind of inclined to think that that Yossi Shane, who wrote this book, that he's onto something. That I think that's an extremely, extremely strong identification point today for Jewishness, for Jewish identification. The success of Birthright has opened up a lot of young Jews to connection to Judaism, to Jewish life, through the door of Israel, through Israel. And I remember in my years of taking kids to Israel in my young days, of taking teenage tours, taking USY groups, and how a lot of kids who never gave a thought about being Jewish may have had a bar bat mitzvah, but it meant very little to them except the party. No Jewish connection, nothing at all. But being in Israel was impactful.
It's the truth, yeah.
And I would say that one of my groups that I led 42 years ago, I think, the year before I came to Beth David, they established a Facebook group. And I don't do much on, some of you may be friends of me. I never go on Facebook, so I'm really, don't be offended if you send me messages. I never see them because I go on Facebook 4 times a year, by accident usually, not because I plan to. I haven't gotten into it yet. I'm still remembering the black telephones that with the wire connecting them to the wall. But a group of my pilgrims from 1980 established a face group. And it was just wonderful to be invited to join that group and see a lot of them are very Jewishly connected. And I know that many of them were not when they came to Israel that summer. But that's been, I think Shane is right, that in a sense, that part of, a major change in Jewish identity has occurred. I'm able to talk about that more next time, but how the impact of Israel in terms of our identification as Jews and how important it has been and how challenged we are when Israel is attacked and how much that hurts us more than other forms of anti-Semitism, I think. I think the attacks on Israel are extremely painful, and were that not integral to our identification as Jews, it wouldn't hurt us as much. And when one doesn't identify with Israel, again, to me, that is more challenging, certainly than one who doesn't identify with the 613 commandments, frankly. I mean, that's just my bias, but that's something we'll talk about. So I've talked enough. I'm going to leave the last time, I'm going to open to if there are questions or comments. I've been talking much too much. Get me on the Zoom and I don't stop talking. If anybody wants to ask a question or say something, please feel free. This is your opportunity. I think some of your comments are great, and I apologize that I don't get a chance to really look at. I'm not good at looking at chats while I'm talking. Sharon, you want to say, sir? I apologize. You had your hand up earlier. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I had to write down. I'm like you. I forgot almost what I was going to say, so I wrote it down so I remember a little quicker here.
It takes me a while.
Otherwise, the mind would have gone. So I'm agreeing with like 99, if not 100% of what you're saying. And I find myself, even if I'm talking to, we'll say, a Jew that is non-practicing, in other words, they don't even go to the shul, or they have a different outlet, or some that are Orthodox, because I do a part-time job and they are Orthodox there. When it comes to Israel, and Israel's under attack, or even what year ago, what happened with the Hamas in Israel, we unite. There's something there that unites us. And I 100% agree when we talk. A person that converts to Judaism, because I got 2 of them in my my first cousins. To me, they are Jews. Once they have made that step and they dedicated, and they've gone through actually our shul, one of them, and I think it was a year-long conversion till they went, and their spouse who also had to go through the whole thing, I think they are Jewish. What I'd like to just say too is that there's something mannerisms or something about when you can be in a room and you don't know, you walk into a room and all of a sudden you can feel the mannerisms are saying, and you say they're Jewish, and I don't know how to explain that.
It's called Judar.
I don't know, it's just you get that feeling. And something else we didn't talk about, there's Jewish music, there's Jewish food. I've got friends from South Africa. I mean, they didn't grow up like here in Canada, and yet we have the same food. We have certain things. There's a certain, like you say, spark, or they have it. But I really believe, and to be all fair, once you convert, or if you're a Jew, regardless of color, skin, wherever you're from, you're a Jew. And also, I might as well say one more thing too while talking here, is that without Israel, we're nothing. You see with the anti-Semitism going on now today, and more than ever, I tell my grandchildren, my children are all on board, so I'm not worried. But I have a 19-year-old, a 17, and go down, and I said, without Israel, we're nothing. 1939 can happen at any point, and you can see it now. I mean, 2 schools in Toronto, Charles H. Best and Valley somebody. Yeah. I mean, so.
Yeah, I mean, well, the stuff here is really minimal compared to what happens in other places. I mean, it's really, to get, swastika comes on, people go crazy, it's we don't like it, but there's some, in Ukraine, my friend who's a rabbi, they're very scared about, anti-Semitism in the Ukraine is very serious. It's not, kids, things stupid, like dumb, idiotic stuff, but it can be life-threatening. So, then it gets really scary. But, a few things, I like what you said. By the way, the culture is different. Like, if you've ever, it's a great restaurant. If you've ever frequent Shalom India, the kosher Indian restaurant, the stuff is amazing. It's very different from what, the Ashkenazi Jews eat. I mean, it's totally different food. We don't even the names. So there are, there's no uniformity in terms of, but part of, so there are variances, but there are also certain affinities as well. In the same way in prayer, for example, which is, based in Jewish law, but nonetheless, there's also a lot of tradition, and you're going to feel a bit lost sometimes in a North African Sephardic shul, because they do, the style will be quite different. The melodies are quite different. The Torah reading style is quite different. Even the Torah form is different. But, I mean, in terms of the way it's standing up, it's not lying down. I mean, a lot of differences. But there'll be points of affinity. There'll be certain prayers that will be the same. Certain will be different. The Shema's there. I mean, a lot of it's similar. There are a lot of similarities, a lot of affinities, but there are also differences. But that's okay. I mean, the fact is we do have, different, but there are a lot of things that bring us together, and we often overlook the points of commonality, because it's more fun to focus on the differences. In terms of Israel, and I may want to spend more time next week, in 2 weeks talking about that. In terms of Israel, one of the important things to keep in mind, and my friend Deborah Lipstadt, who's hopefully going to become Biden's anti-Semitism czar, and they're just delaying it. But she's brilliant, and I've known her when I was in my teenage youth group. She was the youth director, so I've known Deborah for 50 years. She's gone very far in life, but when she says often, she said it at her senatorial hearing. She said that, when she's asked the question, do you view anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism? And she said, well, she'll separate, but, criticism of Israel, that's not anti-Semitism. She's go to any cafe in Tel Aviv and you can hear criticism of Israel. Israelis are the most critical of Israel. I mean, criticize the government, that's what we do. That's part of our, every moment, every Israeli is doing it all the time. That's fine. I mean, you can still criticize as an Israeli policy. They're not anti-Semites. And when you start saying that, when you start swinging the anti-Semite, label at someone who makes a critical comment about an Israeli policy, then you're making a mistake. But when you're denying the legitimacy of there being a Jewish state, when you are not recognizing the right of Israel to defend itself, when you're not recognizing Israel's, right to security, etc., when you're not recognizing the legitimacy of there being, then it crosses that line to anti-Semitism. It doesn't mean that you can't criticize it. And we have to keep that in mind all the time, because sometimes people become hypersensitive, and if someone says, we Jews and especially Israelis are highly critical. I'm a member of the executive of the World Zionist Organization and of the Jewish Agency, And I have meetings the next week that I'm not going to. I could be going to, but I'm not yet traveling to Israel, so I'm going to be joining it virtually again. Hopefully in the summer when there are meetings, I'll be able to actually go. So I'm at these meetings, and these are the most committed Zionists on the planet. When you're on the executive of the World Zionist Organization, they kind of assume you're a Zionist. Otherwise, it would be pretty silly. But you hear the most sharp criticism of Israeli policy at these meetings and anywhere else in the world. Where, this is not a love fest in terms of Israeli policy. Just like people in the Canadian Parliament, we have enough tsuris going on in Canada right now, but in Ottawa in Parliament, it's not like it's a love fest about policy. But you can't say that people, maybe some are because of some of the parties we have in Canada, but basically they're not people who are rejecting the legitimacy of the country. Again, with one major exception probably in our wonderful country. But we have that in Israel too. We have government members of the parties in the Knesset that's part of the nature of the complexities of Israel. But by and large, the Jews who are in the Knesset, we hope that they may disagree on everything. They may not like each other, but hopefully they're united on the belief that in a strong and secure Jewish state. That's something that brings us together, even though we're not going to agree on all of the fine points. We'll find that in shul. I mean, of course, Beth David, we always agree on everything, but when there'll be disagreements sometimes. There'll be policy disagreement, but hopefully, bottom line is there's a solid commitment to the community and to the well-being and to shared values that bring us together, even though the specifics as to how we achieve those values will not always agree. And that's the nature of life. It's also the nature of being Jewish. By the way, sociologists will point out to us that most of synagogues that have the word shalom in the name, that most of the synagogues that have the word shalom in the name began from a rift, from a war, from a battle. So Shula's best shalom is usually, a road of shalom is usually a breakaway. I grew up in Montreal, and there were two breakaway, and I was raised, I think I've told it, I've not hidden this, I've been proud of this fact. I was raised in the Reform movement, and in my teens I became a rebel and started going to an Orthodox shul and ended up as a conservative rabbi. I'm very confused. But the synagogue that I was raised in doesn't exist anyway. It merged with the congregation from which it broke away. It broke away from a congregation that was called Temple Emmanuel, which still exists. The congregation that formed was called Beth Shalom, the House of Peace, because it came out of a war, out of a battle, because there was a fight and they left Emmanuel, it became Beth Shalom, the name Peace. Then there was a second breakaway from Emmanuel that became Rodev Shalom, that became Seeker of Peace. So virtually, and sociologists will say they've gone through all of these shuls throughout North America that have the name Shalom in it, invariably came out of a fight. But so they became named for peace, but they were born in the opposite scenario. So it's one of the really interesting peculiarities. And by the way, in Montreal, all those shuls now came back to, because there's only one Reformed congregation. They all reunited with the mothership, and they made peace and shalom, and they're all very happy, supposedly, although they're having their own service. But although the Montreal one is now led by a wonderful Toronto woman who's been a rabbi for many years, whose late father was the president of Beth Tzedek. So Grusgod is the rabbi. They've been there very successful for many years. But that's often the case of Jewish life. That we have there's disagreement. We don't always get along, but there's a certain commonality. And that, if I want to do a concluding sentence about today's session, identity is confusing. There are many very different identification points. You get an ultra-Orthodox Jew and a Reformed Jew, and we're all going to have different ways you identify. I think the ideal is that we have various identification points. There's a certain racial aspect to it, in that we have this Pintele Yid, this thing that we inherit. I believe in that, but it's something that can be, if we didn't come by it through genetics, I think we can acquire enough of Jewishness in order to compensate. There's the very significant religious aspect of through Torah, through mitzvah, identification through Torah, through mitzvah, through study, and through peoplehood, through national identity, through Israel. and through culture, which is also part of the peoplehood of Jew, which gives us that point of identification as well. Some of us identify narrowly through only one of those facets. Some of us, and I think ideally, identify through many of them. There are various identification points. It's not a simple answer. It's not a simple issue, but identification is, as long as we identify as Jews, that's the important thing. How we identify and how we define that identification, that we can figure out. What I may suggest you do, I'll give you homework. So try to write a few sentences. You feel free to send it to me, and I'll share them at some point. How you identify as a Jew, even a few sentences. What's your main identification point? How do you identify as a Jew? And is it through religion? Is it through Torah? Is it through shul? Is it through prayer? Is it through food? Is it through culture? Is it through Yiddish? Is it through dance? Is it through song? Is it through Israel? Is it through several of the above, all of the above, none of the above? How do you identify as Jewish and as a Jew? What's your identification point? Thank you all, and wish you all good health. It's great to see all of you, and I really appreciate. I'm honored by all of you joining this our discussion tonight, and hopefully that there was I didn't see any of you drop off, which is good. I mean, when you start off, we achieved a high of 44, and I think we stayed there. I'm always happy when that happens. When you start off with 44 and you end up with 8, something is wrong. So I'm very pleased. And those of you who joined, I know some of you, I alluded earlier that I know some of you are going through hard times right now, through illness in the family, and I wish you refuah shlema and good strength and good health to all your loved ones and to all of you, and staying safe again. And those of you who are with us from a distance, like Marion, even the day is still young. It's only 6 p.m. It's dinner hour for Marion now in Vancouver. And so thank you, and all of those who joined from a distance, thank you. Thank you to Dave and to Ruth again for sponsoring it tonight. That was very kind of you and very gracious of you. And Erev Tov, Laila Tov to all of you. Stay well, stay happy.
Thank you.
And I'll leave the Zoom on for a few minutes if you want to talk to each other. I should say before I get off that when I originally planned this, I had hoped that these next 2 sessions would be hybrid, that would be able maybe to have live. We're not there yet, but maybe when we get to our April session, our final session, God willing, maybe we can then have a hybrid component if it's safe. We can again have a gathering. We can have it, people who can come to shul can come to shul. We'll actually be able to serve a cookie, and also to have Zoom as well. I hope we could do these. We weren't able to do that. Maybe we can at least have one. And God willing, when I do something next year, God willing, let it be live. We will offer the virtual access as well, because I think that's the new future. That's the future now. But let's hope that we can actually have physical contact, direct contact, not simply virtual contact. Bimhera b'yameinu soon and often in the months and years to come. Okay, I'll leave it on for all. If any of you want to talk to each other, feel free to do so. And
for Rabbi Scheim. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you very
much. Well, everybody, keep well.
Be well, everyone.
Keep well.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is like the Waltons. Remember, they used to have all the speakers. Like, those of us who are, of age can remember that. These wouldn't know what I'm talking about.
Please say hi to Brenda. Just keep well.
Will do. Thank you. Marion, regards to the family in Vancouver. Thank you all. Okay. I think I can say goodnight to you guys. Good night, Helen. Good night, everybody.